I'm incredibly excited to introduce today's guest, Glenn McDonald. Glenn is a music evangelist, algorithm designer, software engineer, and technology strategist. He created the music exploration website Every Noise at Once, and for 12 years was the data alchemist at the Echo Nest and Spotify. He has written about music online since before blog was a word, and his first offline book, You Have Not Yet Heard Your Favorite Song, How Streaming Changes Music, is available now from Canberra Press. The AMPS community is super lucky to have this exclusive opportunity to hear from Glenn. So, welcome, Glenn, and thank you so much for being with us on your Tuesday night and zooming in all the way from Cambridge.
Happy to. Hello, everybody.
So, to start off with a big, broad question, your new book, You Have Not Yet Heard Your Favorite Song. Um, what does that phrase mean to you, and how did it become the guiding theme for your work?
So it wasn't originally the title for the book when I was first writing it. When I started writing, I assumed that I'd call the book Every Noise at Once, like the website. And what I discovered in the process of trying to find a publisher for the book were a couple things. One was that fear is the main way people sell books. And I really didn't want to sell a book based on fear or to attract people based on fear. And Every Noise at Once is not fearful exactly, but it doesn't lead with hope and optimism. And I really wanted something that did. And I also wanted something that would make it clear that this was not primarily like a reference book. So the publisher initially was like, we should just call it like How Streaming Changes Music. And I thought, yeah, it's not, it's a little quirkier than that. So I wanted a title that sounded a little less, not less informative, but less dry than that. And we spent a lot of time debating many possibilities. And this was the one that the publisher and I both liked the best. And as you'll know if you've read 2 pages of the book, it's a line. It was a line that was already in the introduction to the book, and it's a way of motivating a baseline optimism about streaming, that there's so much music out there that probably there's things that you haven't heard yet that you will love at least as much, if not more, than all the things that you've already heard.
Yeah, I like that, leading with optimism rather than fear. Um, and it's also interesting that the book delves into genre as both a helpful and a problematic tool. Can you please talk about your approach to genre and vibe and how music is experienced and classified?
Yeah, I ended up spending a lot of time on genre in my 12 years of doing this. Not, and that was never exactly the plan. I didn't really have a plan to begin with. I like needed a new job at one point, and I knew some people who had this startup that was trying to do music intelligence, whatever that was, and that sounded like something that I wanted to be able to say that I had done. And uh, initially, we had all this data, but we didn't really do much with genre. We scraped the web and collected all these words that people wrote about music and had a big database of them. So we could tell you like what people tended to say when they were describing Beyonce or Metallica or something. But we were initially like a little snobby about the idea of genre, like, oh, genres don't really exist, and everything is just it's all just music. But this was before the Echo Nest got acquired by Spotify. We were a tiny company trying to get customers, and so we kind of had to do whatever we could find people to pay us to do. And people kept asking us for genre radio. This was the era, the original era of Pandora, and so online like web radio is mostly artist or song based. But that meant you had to like know what to ask for. And so more than one potential customer we were talking to wanted to make it simpler than that. They wanted it to be like a car radio with a bunch of presets, and you'd be like rock, jazz, classical, and it would play you music, and you wouldn't have to like already know what you wanted. And so, in a fit of enthusiasm, one day we promised a customer that we had that, and we didn't really, but we figured we could have it, and so we like went back to the office and scrambled trying to put something together, and discovered very quickly that the words people use to describe music are often the same words that are the names of genres, but those concepts are a little different. And so my understanding of genre emerged from trying to make genre listening experiences that made some kind of sense. And what I eventually realized is, and this is not an insight new to me, and I probably could have realized it earlier if I'd been more diligent about consulting reference material, but I was too busy for that, is genres are communities. They are generally formed by communities of artists and listeners and practice. It's usually some combination of those three things, but they're really based in people. And there's a sort of musicological notion of genre that it's just like characteristics. Like ragtime is this kind of rhythm and these kinds of arrangements. And there are genres that have like distinguishing musical characteristics, but those are a function of the people that made them, not the other way around. And so once I understood that, then that sort of unlocked the whole project for me because I wasn't trying to draw finer and finer distinctions between certain styles of music. I was just trying to find all the groups of people that have gotten together around music in the world and be able to show them back to themselves and say, look, this is who you are. This is what you listen to. This is what you love. This is what you're near to in the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's so cool to think about genres as communities. And a related question to that is about Every Noise at Once. So if you haven't already checked out, it's an extensive map of music genres. It's quite amazing, really, seeing all the different genres and how they relate and link to each other. So, Glenn, can you please tell us more about how that started and the process behind mapping music genres like that?
Yeah, so the genre project started, like I said, from very practical, like we wanted to be able to sell genre radio. And we were also at the Echo Nest doing a lot of programmatic music analysis. So a lot of machine learning driven by human examples to try to quantify aspects of listening. So things like energy and valence and danceability and whether something is acoustic and electric. We just wanted to be able to have some way of measuring these things for all songs, not and including songs that someone just made and uploaded to a streaming service. We wanted to be able to score all these things immediately and not have to wait for a bunch of humans to get around to like filling out a checklist of characteristics. And so part of the challenge of that is figuring out how well you're doing. Like you pick 1,000 songs and you get some college interns to tag them, like these are electric, these are acoustic, and then you feed that into a big machine learning process. And then the question is like, okay, how good is it? You can have it score the other 60 million songs, but you can't check them all, or you would have just tagged them all yourself to begin with. So the genre map actually began as a diagnostic tool. It's just doing scatter plots, aggregating these calculated scores by genre, because then at least I could have some high level idea of whether things were working or not. Like when we were trying to measure whether things were electric or acoustic, it's pretty hard to tell how well you're doing by just picking individual songs. But if I average those scores by genre, then like tech house had better be at one end and classical piano had better be at the other end. And you could just visually scan a graph of those things and be like, well, that's reasonable. That's reasonable. Like, wait, what? Why are electric blues in the acoustic thing? Um, and so in making that display more readable so that I could use it for diagnostic purposes, eventually I was like, actually, this some of these, not all of the plots made sense, but some of them were like, this is kind of an interesting way to explore music. And so at some point I had 14 or 15 of these internal dimensions we were measuring. And I just began trying random combinations of them in the XY axis. And actually the colors in the map are also 3 more dimensions into the red, green, and blue channels programmatically. So I just began playing with those 5 combinations until I got something that sort of made visceral sense. So that whole map is laid out by code. It's actually a scatter plot originally, and then there's a bunch of fiddly code that like bumps all the names around so that they're not on top of each other. Um, but yeah, so I'm as amazed by it as anybody else. It's not like I decided where anything on that page should go or what color it should be. Um, but there it is. Math.
Awesome.
Fascinating.
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear that insight about how it was created. And talking about music features, I know a lot of us here today are probably really interested in those characteristics and how we categorize and analyze music. Because in music psychology, many of us analyze Spotify's audio features um, through the API, or we used to when it was still available. But particularly, we looked at valence and energy characteristics to study emotional responses to music. So, for example, some of us in the music psychology lab here at the University of Melbourne, we explored the valence and energy trends in songs that were popular during Mercury retrograde. So, yeah, if you're able to, can you please give us some insight into how these features are calculated? We suspect they're based on elements like tempo, loudness, key signature, rather than the mood of the lyrics.
Yeah, that's true. So the two start with the 2 bits of bad news about these things. The one that you already alluded to is that Spotify has begun shutting off access to those things for apps that are, you can get them for individual songs, but you can't get them in bulk anymore, which makes it a big pain to do anything interesting. But the other bad thing before that, so when we got acquired, one of my fond hopes was that we would have the resources to do a lot more of that, to really push the programmatic analysis of music and finish the process, which to me we had only just begun, of trying to measure as many, as much of the human emotional response to music as possible. And in truth, we pretty much did no more of that after we got acquired by Spotify. Like the same software that calculates all those things is running in an almost unedited state, from what it was 14 years ago. And Tristan Jehan, who was the Econest founder, who's was most responsible for that side of the Econest's work, stuck around for a little while at Spotify, but not very long, and went on to other pursuits. So it's cool that there are 14 dimensions, but listening has a lot more than that. And I don't know how many, because we never got much further than that. Energy and valence are some of the more useful ones, and even then they're not that useful, at least in isolation. I was almost never satisfied with anything that I ever did using the acoustic attributes by themselves. And in fact, one of my early experiments before Every Noise, before there was a genre project even, uh, was trying to predict genre in terms of just like descriptive words for a song from just its audio. So like knowing nothing about the artist or the context, but you have these bits that make noise, and you have 60 million other bits that make noise. Um, can you figure out what this one is? And yeah, sometimes you could get sort of plausible answers to that, but often you would just get terrible ones. It'd be like Britney Spears is avant-garde glitch. I'm like, no, no, it really isn't. And now I don't trust you on anything. Um, so, but when combined with cultural information, listening information, then the acoustic stuff got really interesting. So it was particularly good at finding outliers. So like if you had a bunch of stuff that you thought was metal, you could do a very good job of finding like the orchestral interludes from metal live albums, or the random reggae songs that were not actually by metal bands, but the reggae band had the same name as a metal band, so it had been miscategorized. That turned out to be really good. And for sort of aligning, like smoothing the transitions between things within a set of music that you had cultural parameters for knowing that it all made sense, that worked too. But by themselves, we just didn't, there's just not enough dimensions to avoid cases where, yeah, these two songs are similar in these two ways, but a human would never pick those two ways. Like this song is fast if you like tap it out, but fast is not what a human would notice about it. Like that kind of um, like human idea of what's important about a song. And your point about lyrics is the same kind of thing. There are some songs that what they are about lyrically is a lot of what they're about as an artwork. And there are some songs that like it doesn't matter what the words are to anybody. Like they could be it could be in a foreign language to everybody, including the people whose culture it's from, and no one would really care. So I wish I had a better answer. I think it was possible to do more and get a better computational idea of how we respond to music physically and emotionally, even though there's a lot of cultural dimensions to that. But that was not Spotify's priority.
Mhm. And yeah, and in your book, you briefly mentioned music that's engineered for mood adjustment. Do you see emotion aware recommendations becoming more common in the future? What do you think that could look like?
It it's an interesting idea. Fear for the I fear for the economics of such an enterprise. I feel that it will fear that it will get corrupted very quickly by people who want to sell you music for mood adjustment more than they care about your mood. Um, and I don't know how to control for that. It's also, like I said, very, very culturally contextual. And so this, the valence, if you spent much time playing with Spotify's valence score across all music, not just music you already knew, you may have discovered that there are kinds of music that are uniformly high valence, even though if you know anything about them, you know that it's not all happy. It's like flamenco and merengue. Like there are a bunch of Latin forms that have like high-pitched guitars that score very highly consistently on that valence score because it's not calibrated to different cultures. It's just one score fed by one set of examples. And so it can only make one set of judgments, but a thing that would be a buoyantly happy song in Montana may not have the same effect in Guadalajara and vice versa. So there are a bunch of things that if you start crossing cultural boundaries, you have to sort of you can still use the scores, but you have to kind of recalibrate them as you go and remind yourself that yes, like all of the flamenco is going to score highly, but that doesn't mean it's all happy. Like this is a flamenco song about all of somebody's cattle dying or something. It's like it's it's very, very sad, but you have to know that.
Yeah, that's definitely something we've been talking about in music psychology, how people's emotional responses to music are just so subjective, and can be influenced by a lot of factors, including culture. And it's hard for an algorithm to account for that. Um, I've been working on
And
an, yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, and familiarity is for an individual person is orders of magnitude more powerful than anything else. So you could engineer the perfect mood elevating song and play it for somebody who's never heard it, and it might have some effect, or it might just go right by them. And then you put on some song that they heard when they were 12, which is objectively speaking about a earthquake or some horrible disaster or a breakup or something, but they heard it when they were riding in their parents' car, on the way to a birthday party when they were 12. And so it is an instant source of a feeling of well-being and excitement for them, independent of what it does for anybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And at the moment, the algorithm doesn't know our memories that are associated with songs. Um, yeah, I think Karen has a question. So, does this mean there is a Western-centric algorithm at play, given the examples of things like flamenco music and meaning constructed from other cultures?
Yeah, I think there definitely is. And it it makes different amounts of difference in different things. Like tempo calculations are fairly unaffected. Like things are fast or slow, subjectively based on like how often the volume goes up and down, and that's not that culturally subjective. But valence is very subjective. Danceability is very subjective. Like even what function dance has in a society varies widely across societies. Um, so all of those things exist in a minefield of bias, but like all of human culture is a minefield of bias in that way. I often said that my role as a genre categorizer was trying to find that bias. Like I wasn't trying to avoid bias. I was trying to like isolate all the biases and label them correctly, because that's what culture is.
Yeah. Um, Keeping with the emotion theme, I've been working on an app in my PhD that recommends music based on how someone feels now and how they'd like to feel, supporting this gradual change in emotion. I'm wondering, do you think this kind of tool would sit comfortably within commercial music platforms, or is there just a fundamental tension between user well-being and commercial goals?
Well, it's probably both. It would, I mean, it would probably I think most commercial platforms would be happy to have such a feature to try to attract and retain people with. Doing a good job of it is probably often in conflict with commercial goals, and especially if the thing that you thought should happen is someone should like turn off their streaming service and sit quietly for a little while, then you're gonna have a hard time finding any streaming service that's in favor of that. Um, but that's a baseline problem of capitalism that you would have to deal with no matter what you do. I think to me the bigger challenge, like we were just saying, is that for me, and I think for a lot of people, the connection between music and feelings of well-being is really, really strong, but really personal. And I am virtually certain that given a feature that would offer to regulate my mood in a music app, I would nod sagely and say, "Well, thank you for trying, but now I'm going to go listen to my music because that's what makes me happy." So I think it's a hard problem to reach past people's familiarity filters to get them to respond to music for just its musical characteristics. Right? It's like it's the same thing with food, like getting someone to just taste something for its literal taste, independent of anything else, is in the course of their regular eating is like really hard. Like if you can sit them down and get them away from a regular table and say, all right, we're gonna give you a spoonful of this special flavor compound, and you're gonna think about what the flavor is. But it's very hard to do that. You could do that with sound. You could say, all right, we're going to put you in a dark room and we're going to play a series of tones for you. So it's like abstracted audio in the way that a spoonful of flavor syrup would be abstracted food. But if what you're trying to do is actually just play people songs, then it's like feeding them tacos. They just have a lot of associations and existing preferences, and oh, if this is tacos, this is dinner, and I have needs for dinner that make it a really difficultly complicated problem, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's almost like maybe unfamiliar music is the way to go. AI generated music. Um, and that leads me to another question. So playlists are the dominant listening format right now, but do you think playlists um, have a lifespan and maybe we're heading towards a different model, something like a real-time AI generated stream of music based on our biometrics?
I mean, over my dead body, which is maybe a way of saying yes, but 40 years from now, I don't. I mean, to me, algorithmically generated music is like it's interesting that such a thing can exist, um, in sort of the same way that putting a urinal on a museum wall was meta interesting as art. But many decades have gone by and our museums are not yet full of urinals. They're still mostly full of paintings and sculptures. And I think we're gonna have, I mean, playlists in the sense that like there are songs and we listen to them one after another is sort of the music equivalent of like artwork, and you look at one after another in a room or on a wall. And I think it's that way not because there's not technology to do something else, but because that's the unit of artistic expression. And I care about music because people made it and put their experience of life into it. And in part, I care about it because it is often not a literal recounting of that experience. It's weird, elusive, abstract qualities are part of why it's appealing. But AI music has none of that. It has no human intent. It is not a message from anyone to anyone. And so I don't need robots to write music any more than I need robots to eat my dinner. It would be impressive if they could, but pointless to me.
Yeah, and including emotion in music recommendation, I think also brings up some ethical issues, particularly about telling a commercial app how you're feeling. Um, and in your book, you described music streaming as surveillance capitalism and about platforms knowing what we listen to, but not really why. And it's interesting that Liz Pelly suggests the opposite in her book, Mood Machine, that our emotions can be inferred from our music choices. So, what's your view on how deeply these platforms really know us?
Well, Moon Machine is very clearly a book sold based on fear. And I mean, I've met Liz, and that there's a lot of that's a book worth reading if you're involved in music streaming, but it's also really grim, and I would never have had the patience to write it, even if I didn't think that streaming were basically a positive for society. Um, the I mean, surveillance capitalism is a critique thrown at many things, which in the book I acknowledge on a technical level, but we listening data really does not tell you, the platform operator, very much. It about individuals. It conveys a lot of stuff collectively, and so it is then tempting to infer that people are like the average of the collective that their listening most resembles. And so if you have someone listening to music that tends to occur on playlists that people put words like sad and crying and rainy and in the titles of, then it's reasonable to infer that that person is sad, and you can do that with math, but you better not count on that being right. And it's not even very interesting at the individual level. It's mostly interesting at the collective level. And particularly if you're trying to tell people how they're feeling, then I think you've just misunderstood what your task should be as a technologist. You can do a good job of offering people alternatives, but you can't read their mind, and you just annoy them by trying. And the car radio station presets were one of my standard explanations of this. It is very useful in your car radio to be able to set the 5 stations that you usually toggle between. That makes a big difference in usability over a car radio with just a knob, where you just always have to be twisting and finding one of the 5 places on the dial that has the music that you like to listen to. So the work done in technology to make those preset buttons work is great work. The additional work to read your mind and guess which of those 5 presets you want at any moment is worthless. It's difficult, and it's just a waste of time. Like, it's the wrong model for how the technology and the person should be interacting. It is not the technology's job to read your mind. It is not even the technology's job to assume that there is a right answer about what you want to listen to. The technology's job is to get out of your way, help you punch those 5 buttons in whatever irritated succession you feel like in order for you to be like, oh, in order for you to discover what you feel like when you hear it. And I found myself at Spotify often being the one to give the speech about like, no, there's not an answer. There were definitely people at Spotify who felt like the ideal music interface is a play button. That's all. The screen is a big play button, and you push it, or more likely, it pushes itself as soon as you come close enough to earshot of your computer or your earbuds, and it just figures out magically what it is that you want next. And I would just stare at these people like they were from outer space and be like, no, there's no, you don't want something. I mean, you might want something next, but you might not. And if you never make decisions, you will never develop taste. So the thing to do is not give you something, but remind you of all the things that you could be listening to, help you discover, help you remember the things that you discovered before and lost track of, or the album you never finished listening to. It's just that the the model of what machines and algorithms are for in the listening process and in people's lives in general, I think, is not about figuring out what you are for you, but about helping you discover what you are for yourself.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what are your thoughts on emerging forms of music discovery? For example, AI curated playlists and algorithmically generated songs.
Well, like I said, I have no interest in algorithmically generated songs. I mean, I'm fascinated by the fact that they're possible, and interested to see if they get technically any better. But if they don't, that's fine. If we suddenly forgot how to do that, I wouldn't waste any time trying to rediscover it. We don't really need that. Algorithmically generated playlists. I mean, I spent most of my time at Spotify writing SQL queries that administered math that collated listening preferences in order to figure out what we know collectively about music. So so I generated, tens of thousands of algorithmic playlists, and I better think that that's a useful thing to do. But the reason I thought it was useful was it's human knowledge that all that math was collecting. And at the moment where the technology or the algorithm begins to disconnect from the human collective knowledge beneath it is the point where it becomes pointless. And so over the course of my time at Spotify, there were many times where people came up with clever technical ways using machine learning to recommend music that were not based on actual people liking things. And to me, that was the wrong use of technology. Like, there's no, that's not, that's not a useful thing. It's not a thing we need. It's not a good thing. There's no shortage of music. There's no shortage of culture. We don't need to invent, like, technologists don't need to invent new culture to fill some sort of absence. There's more than enough of it. And there's people trying to make a living by making music. And if the technologists can help them find audiences and help audiences find music, then that has a clear human purpose. But if we're interfering with that and effectively running technology-based lotteries that pick random songs that no human has endorsed with their love and try to make them money, that's not a thing we needed.
Yeah. And I think I have one last question before I might open it up to the group. So you've had a front row seat to how Spotify's recommendations evolved over time. And there's a couple of us here who might be close to finishing our PhDs and are possibly considering working in the music industry. So I'm wondering, what was it like working at a music company like Spotify on these algorithms, and what were your main learnings?
So it changed slowly and steadily and sort of unsurprisingly over the time I was there. The thing that I always said about the Echo Nest in our early days was the only reason we were there was to try to make sense of music. And so if we were doing something with music and it was wrong in musical terms, then it was obvious to us that we had to fix it. Like if we were putting reggae on a classical music playlist, like everything stopped until we could fix that. Like if we were going to do that wrong, then we might as well all just quit and go work in a deli and let Amazon and Apple worry about music. And so I never had to argue with anybody at the Echo Nest about whether music was important or whether fixing bugs was important or being right was important or whether there was right or wrong or it was worthwhile arguing about whether Kate Bush is more similar to Suzanne Vega or David Bowie. Like it was obvious that like that's what we were doing. That was a frivolous question for someone in insurance adjustment, but it was our business and the reason why we existed. And in the beginning, after we were acquired by Spotify, that was still basically true at Spotify. But as Spotify grew from, I don't know, 1,000, 1,200-ish people when I joined to more like 10,000 when I was laid off, it definitely got to the point where increasingly I would have to argue with people about whether music was important. And there'd be some problem, and someone would say, "Oh, the metrics are fine." Okay, so now you have two problems. Your metrics suck, and whatever was broken is still broken. And if you aren't going to care about it, then again, like Jeff Bezos will happily own the music business if you let him. Why does Spotify exist if not to do music well? And sadly, you know, there there became lots of answers to that question when that question that was meant to be a rhetorical question, but there ended up being practical questions like, I mean, practical answers like, well, we have investors and we have a podcast business, an audio business, an audiobook business. And so music was still most of the business and important to many of the employees, but it was no longer inarguable that something that was bad for music had to be fixed in a business sense, in a technical sense, in a cultural sense.
Thank you so much, Glenn. That was super interesting to hear your insights into music and working in the music industry. I'm going to open it up to the group now. So if anyone has a question for Glenn, feel free to unmute and join the conversation or pop it in the chat. Would anyone like to start us off?
I'll start off.
Cool, thanks, Matt.
Glenn, thank you again for doing this. Greatly appreciated. I obviously wasn't at Spotify anywhere near as long as you were. So you've sort of seen the longer arc of the evolution of what Spotify has become. And I think your just most recent point about the podcasting and the book business and shareholder value and sort of the commercialization, the commodity of audio content. And now Spotify's pushing to video as well. Like, what's probably a two-part question? What do you see in your crystal ball, the future of Spotify when it comes to music specifically, and then audio content? And then are you seeing any other in industry and kind of up and coming startups doing some really interesting things with music from a consumer kind of fan curation point of view?
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is really one question tied up in looking in both directions. I I will be shocked if the existing powers in streaming music are the same in 5 or 10 years, but I'd be equally shocked if they weren't largely the same. So, we'll Spotify, one of them will fail, maybe two of them. Will Spotify be one of them? I don't know, maybe. Um, I I try to stay out of the prediction business because it encourages you to think of the future as something that's going to happen outside of your control that you can only bet on. And I prefer to think about what I can do for the future. And so the fascinating, funny thing about having become minorly famous in a very particular niche through my work at Spotify is when I got laid off, I had a lot of people who wanted to talk to me and who have continued to contact me in the year and a half since. Many of them have correctly identified that there are lots of things broken in the current music business and have set about to fix something. And most of those efforts will probably fail, just like most startups fail. And but probably not all of them. And my guess is that by 5 or 10 years from now, something will be massively different. And it won't seem massively different because we will have lived through those 5 or 10 years one day at a time, and so everything will be progressing slowly. But if you jump 10 years, if you manage to jump 10 years from right now to 10 years in the future, something will be dramatically different, and it will probably have started from some startup that changed some little thing that initially didn't seem like it was at the center of the music business, but then turned out to change everything. And I mean, I think TikTok is sort of that from the last 10 years. Like when it started, I don't think anybody perceived it as a major force in music, and it's ended up becoming, in some people's opinion, the driver of music discovery. And even in a lot of people at Spotify's opinion, TikTok took over discovery, and Spotify sort of trails behind as the place where you listen to things once you've discovered them on TikTok. So I'm very hopeful that the stranglehold of the major labels and the tech companies on music will be broken by something. And it might be by a new streaming service with a different business model. But I think it's more likely to be something much more roundabout than that. Someone who changes the way publishing licensing is done in some way that then makes it possible for sync licensing to be done directly to artists. And then suddenly there's more music and I mean, more money and independent music, and then people leave their labels. Like there's some story like that that is impossible to write ahead of time. I mean, easy to write. You could write 100 of them, and most of them will be wrong. But I think we will look back once the world has changed and see that it started in something that was seemingly innocuous. That's my bet.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think we have a question from Solange. So Solange says, Glenn, very thought-provoking chat. Thank you. Many of us have either already or are considering deleting our Spotify accounts for various societal, political reasons that are well known. You have mentioned the human or even humanist reasons for doing what you do. What are your reflections on Spotify and its alternatives through this lens?
Well, I mean, we had a very vivid demonstration of the problem in the last couple of weeks because Daniel Ek, it was announced that he was investing in a few more 100 million of his own money, which comes from the stock market, not out of artists' pockets, technically speaking, but it still sort of feels morally connected, and he's investing it in AI weapons manufacturers. And so a bunch of people are like, oh, Spotify is evil. And then a few days later, switch the camera to the White House, and there is Tim Cook presenting Donald Trump with a gold bar with like some sort of glass plaque stuck in it. Like, and Jeff Bezos is disbanding the Washington Post editorial section. So all of the current major streaming services are run by capitalist companies helmed by billionaires, and there are reasons to hate each one of them. And I don't think it's particularly interesting or helpful to try to measure those abundant justifications against each other and pick one. From a cultural point of view, from the point of view of listeners and artists, I think having more or less all the world's music together on a streaming service is good for music and good for listeners. So I want that. I'd rather it was possible through a nonprofit that wasn't funneling money to fascists or armies. But we don't have that choice at the moment. Disassembling that. So, I said this in the book, but I think collecting all the world's music in one continuous navigable space is one of the greatest cultural achievements of humanity in my lifetime. Like, it's sort of silly to say that when we have the internet, which is obviously a superset of that, but doing it with music is more important to me than doing it with information in general. So I do not want to lose that. I don't think humanity is better off by taking that apart again. I grew up without it, and I don't think it was better. But it's hard to pay money to something that is supporting something that you dislike. So I sympathize with bands who want to take their music off of Spotify. I'll sympathize if they want to take it off of Apple or Amazon or YouTube when the inevitable surge of outrage for one of the other billionaire actions comes to light. But I think it makes the world worse. So I still have a Spotify account, and I have more reason to be pissed at them than any of you. So I guess that's my point of view.
Yeah, does anyone else have any questions for Glenn before we wrap up?
I have one more if no one else does, but I'm also very happy to see if anybody else has another one. Anybody else want to jump in? Glenn, just given the time, this is going to be a very quick question and perhaps a very quick answer, but Xanthe and a few other people on this call kind of are very interested in the curation of music and the relationship between music and well-being, including myself. The music information retrieval obviously was a big part of what the economists were doing around acoustic analysis. Have you seen that? Have you seen the accuracy and or the evolution of what MIR can do when it comes to understanding the human relationship to music?
I've not yet seen any real advance, but I haven't seen. I think it's possible that there will be some from deep learning. And so far, what we've gotten from deep learning, and this is machine learning, I mean, is some kinds of uncanny similarity detection. So we've been able to get like these songs sound like these other songs, pulling out of the 180 million random songs way better than I would have thought possible. That does not equate to mood as it is, and in some ways is like more of an attractive nuisance than a help. Like, one of the reasons that Spotify has begun recommending AI music to people too much is that they are using this acoustic similarity, calculated acoustic similarity, as a proxy for cultural information where there isn't some, which means as a way to recommend songs that nobody has actually heard and loved yet. Arguably, this is what I would have been arguing if I were still there, that's not a thing that you should do. Like, if no one's heard it yet and no one's loved it yet, then fine. Like, let the band play it for their cousins until like they actually have some fans. We have plenty of music that already has fans.
Sure.
But the same technology that does that is probably capable of subtler things. And so, although I have not seen any examples yet of being able to use ML or AI to get at the qualities that affect emotional responses or that are conducive to wellness in some way or another, I could believe that it's possible. I could, if someone comes and and there's a paper that says, oh, we're able to find the songs that calm people. Like we're able to find the 0.25% across the 180 million songs available that have a statistically significant calming effect independent of culture. So here, you like symphonic metal. Here are the 7 symphonic metal songs from the last 10 years that have this quality that we've been able to identify that will calm you even while you're listening to bombastic power chords. I'd be like, okay, that's. I'm glad someone figured that out. It's surprising, but it's not existentially surprising, if that makes sense.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. We're just over time, but anybody else? Any questions? Right.
We have a few people in the chat saying they can't wait to read your book. And thanks for the interesting chat. So that's really good to hear. We might wrap up then. So Glenn, on behalf of the AMPS community, I want to thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your ideas. It's been super interesting, and it's really been a privilege to talk all things music with you. So thank you. And thank you everyone for joining as well and being part of the conversation.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for getting out of bed, braving the morning to come listen to me.
Oh, thanks so much, Glenn.
Thank you so
Greatly
much.
appreciate it, mate.
Thanks, everyone.